Hey guys, Jono here. In today's episode I'll be installing the throttle control cables on my boat. Make sure you click on that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the future action. I'm going to start to measure the exact length of cable I require for the boat. So from the floor up to the controls I have 800, and from the controls to the side of my boat that is another 800. I have to remember to go up from the floor to the gunnel again, so that gives me another 800. So from the side of my boat I'll go all the way to the back of the boat, and that gives me another 2.2, so 2200. And I remember I'll have a loop in the cable right there, and that will go back to the motor. So from there, the side of my boat I measure all the way to the motor, and remember to leave another loop for the motor to be able to turn, and that gives me 1800. So 800 plus 800 plus 800 plus 2200 plus 1800, and that gives me 6400. So that's 6.4 meters. The way I do this is go to Google and then meters to feet, and I put in 6.4 meters, and that works out to 20.9974. so that would be 21 foot. The problem with that is I couldn't find a 21 foot. The biggest cable I could find was 20 foot, but because I left a lot of slack and I over measured it, I'm fairly sure this should be okay. So starting to install the cables from the front to the back, just going all the way where I had my steering cables, along the gunnel, through the hole at the back, and then out from there into the motor. Note that I've got the motor turned all the way to the left, and then you also need to remember to leave a loop in this cable so that the motor can be able to turn. Just testing the cable to make sure there's no snags and that everything is moving freely. I'll start by removing the control, and at the back of the control it has two screws keeping the back plate in place. So we just remove the two screws and then remove the back plate, and then what I need to do is to test which one of these plates that actually holds cable is the right one. So by moving it up and down, I can now see that the top one is that's the throttle controls. The throttle cable goes to the top, and at the bottom is the gear shifter. So the gear cable will go to the bottom and the throttle controls will go to the top. On the controller there's a groove, and on this back plate there is another groove there, and the barrels on these cables, they will just fit right into those grooves, and that holds the cables in place. On top of these cables it has a hole, and that hole would then fit just into this holding plate. On the holding plate it has a pin that goes through the hole, and then it has a 8mm nut that will hold the cable and clamp it down. So just using an 8mm socket to tie the cable on, and then I will be putting the barrel into the groove, and that will hold it in place. Remember to install the bottom cable first, just for obvious reasons. Otherwise, if you've installed the top cable first, you won't be able to get to it afterwards. I'm just holding the bottom cable in place with this clamp, and that's just to keep it in place while I install the top cable. So the top cable has a similar process, it's just it has a hole, and the holding clamp will just go through the hole, and I fasten that with a socket, and then I line up the barrels with the bottom cable so that the groove on the back plate will just fit into there. Then I can remove this clamp, and I take the back plate, line the groove up with the barrel, and then clamp that in place. That holds it all together. The next step would just be to put these screws in there. And then fasten up the screws, and then this part is done. There's two holes on this control, one on the top and one on the inside, and that's where I'm going to have to drill two holes and then fasten the controls to the console. I'm starting with the gear selector cable first. There's a groove on the motor and the barrel that just fits into the groove. At the back there is this rubber cable holder. It's really tough to get the cable in through there, but that just keeps the water from coming in and seals it off. So now we have to align the cable up by just turning this barrel, just making the cable a little bit longer so it will line up with the shifter at the back. So it just fits back into the groove, and that lines up with the clamp and the bolt, so I know the cable length is correct. So next step would just be to remove that cable clamp with a 12mm socket. So I'm just removing the clamp, and there's the three parts. So first of all, there is a bolt. This bolt and the hole needs to line up. That bolt is spring loaded, so the cable goes over the bolt, and it has this washer that fits into the groove there. There's a little groove, it fits over the bolt. And then you've got the clamp, and the clamp has got this pin on the one side. The pin lines up with the metal part on the cable, and then just by using a plier I just clamp this down so that the spring in the bolt can push up and push that bolt through, and then I can then take the nut and just put the nut on there, and just by using the socket, and I just hand tighten this until it just grips, and then I can use the socket to tie it all down. And that's the gear selector cable installed and ready to go. Next, the throttle cable comes in through the rubber cable holder, and then just by adjusting this barrel we can adjust the length of the cable so that it will line up with the throttle arm, and it has this clamp that just clamps and holds it in place, and we just screw that down. The last step would be to clamp the barrels in place, and we just use this clamp, and there's a pin on the top, so that just clips into that pin at the top, and that keeps the barrels in place and the cables from moving. All that's left to do now is to test everything. So the throttle control is in the neutral position, and the gear selector arm is in the neutral position, and the throttle lever is all the way to the back, and that's in idling position. Then switching the controls to reverse, you now have the gear selector all the way to the back, and that's in its reverse position. And then switching the throttle control lever to the forward position, or F on the controller, and then that is the throttle all the way to the front, and that's on its highest revs. Also the gear selector is in the forward position. And that was installing the motor control cables on my boat. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.